Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahushua, Hashem, Bakwadash, the bonds to the apostles, elders, great millstones, hesitation to the brothers, pushing this word of truth and sincerity with charity, and risking their lives and freedom to do so. This is Brianna Guy coming to Great Millstone, Chicago Camp, coming at you in a lesson going to edifying. Quick scripture of the day. You know, um, Jake has a zeal, but not according to knowledge. They want to serve the Lord, but they can't. And when they go about it, it is not the correct way. Calling on JC and going into false doctrines and leaning onto their own understanding and so on and so forth, man. A lot of people say they believe in the Lord, but the scripture says, believe it on me as the scripture has said. So whatever the scripture says, that's what we ought to believe. All right. And implement and rehearse the righteous acts, man. Not just say we believe, and now we got a mouth full of swine. When the scripture says not to eat pork, don't even touch it. Over here, a neck full of rosaries, and the scripture talks about idols. Bowing down to the Virgin Mary. When she wasn't a virgin. And you're supposed to bow down to her. You're not supposed to worship her. And our people are so into all those things, man. Especially heavy Northern Kingdom with the idolatry, the swine, all types of fucking madness that they're into. But anyways, I just so happened to bump into some, family members, and which we all know who our real family is, those that do the will of my Father. Some relatives, and they talking about they believe in the Lord, but the actions prove otherwise. Actions prove otherwise, and that's just off. All right, that shit is off, and we show our faith by our works. Noah moved with faith, man, with fear. All right, they these people don't move with fear. All right, nor do they have faith. You know, um, Scripture talks about how we be rewarded for our labors. Our doings. But let me get James 2:17. Even so, faith, if it hath not works, it is dead, being alone. Yeah, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I'll show thee my faith by my works. Alright, that's why we go out there in the highways and byways. That's why we don't get tatted up and linings and, trimming our ways to seek love. We're not going to go ahead and eat pork, uh, uh, idol worshiping, etc., man. Committing adultery, Jake into all that bullshit, man. Jake heavy into that shit. Just wickedness. Alright? So we show our faith by our works, man. These people have no works. They have no faith. Scripture talks about how with their lips they love him, you know, but in their heart they're far from him. Roughly paraphrasing, man. All right, so people talk a good game, but when it comes down to it, they have no works. All right, absolutely nothing, you know. But that's how we show our faith, being an example to them that are without, you know, being that light, in that room full of darkness, in this dark, evil world, man. Let our light shine, you know. But yeah, man, I just thought it was funny, and this scripture came to mind, James 2:17. Even so, faith, if it had not works, it is dead, being alone. Yeah, man may say that thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I'll show thee my faith by my works. No one's edifying scripture today. Until next time, call Halom Lai Hobashim El Shai in a Bible ball.